Thanks for listening to Backseat's Musical Podcast. If you like what you hear today, be sure to subscribe to it, like it, share it aggressively, and tell everyone you know about it. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee. Visit their state-of-the-art dealership between BJ's and Big Y on Memorial Drive, or go to metrojeep.com and drive home in your new Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram today.
It's Backseat's Musical Podcast.
Resistance is useless!
For the last 300,000 years or so, much of our history has been predicated on who did what first. There was that guy that discovered fire. There was that whole moon landing. There was that first guy that tried not to die climbing Mount Everest. And then you had the first guy to pick up a guitar and write the very first British punk single in history. And while I can't speak for all those other people, I can be certain that Brian James was the guy that wrote the song New Rose for the Damned in 1976, the very first punk rock single in the United Kingdom. Other firsts would follow, as the Damned would become the first British punk band to release an album, 1977's Damn, 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 which was produced by Nick Lowe and released a full 8 months before the Sex Pistols would release their debut album. They would also become the first British punk band to tour the United States, and Brian James would also become the first original guy to leave the band to do other things. And he did. Things like playing with his idol, Iggy Pop, or the time he started the Lords of the New Church with Stiv Bators from the Dead Boys, or the time he started the Racketeers with Stuart Copeland from the Police, Duff McKagan from Guns N' Roses, and Clem Burke from Blondie. The list of stuff that he's done seems practically endless, and there are reasons for this. One, Brian James doesn't sit still for anything for too long of a period of time, and two, at nearly 70 years old, he never stops playing. Later this year, Brian James will be releasing his latest solo album. He's also been busy writing a book about his career, a project that is still very much in the works, even as we speak. To say that Brian James is a legend is putting it quite mildly. And so it's a real pleasure to speak to Brian James from the Damned and Lords of the New Church on Backseat's Musical Podcast. I feel like over the last couple of years in this podcast I've been doing, I've been kind of going around interviewing people that are like Brian James adjacent. I've talked to Rat. I've talked to people like, Miles Copeland and Clem Burke and Cheetah Chrome and a bunch of other people that were also on IRS. So to have the chance to talk to you, finally, it's a real pleasure. So thank you very much.
Oh, so yes, my pleasure, Mike. Yeah.
So, one of the things that I've always been kind of fascinated by you specifically is you always seem to be this guy who is like in perpetual motion. Like you're never one to stay in one place for very long. I don't know if it's a matter of restlessness or just a need to want to tap into fresh situations. Explain that to me if you can. Are you the kind of restless sort?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I am. I can't understand wanting to play with the same bunch of guys throughout my life. It's good. I like playing with different players. I get a buzz out of that, and it stimulates me not only like as a player, but in my songwriting and everything. And I'm a bit of a kind of jazzer, I guess, at heart. Have guitar will travel. I just dig playing. And. I figure I've always been that way since I was a kid. I'm playing in little bands and stuff, blues bands and all kinds of things. It's all kind of, it's like a learning process, and I don't figure you kind of can call yourself a proper musician until you die, and you can't do it no more. It's fun. Particularly drummers, they're the people I really bounce off big time.
And you've certainly played with your share of great ones, that's for sure.
Yeah, I've been very lucky.
Yeah,
the musicians I've played with over the years. Good Lord, yeah, I've been really lucky.
So with that sense of restlessness and wanting to do new things and to play with new players, when it comes to situations like what happened back in 2019 when there was the announcement that all four original members of the Damned were going to get back together for the first time in years. I mean,
Yeah.
was that a weird decision for you to join in, since you kind of already had been through that with those guys?
Nah, not really. It was kind of once. It's always been kind of like sort of maybe on the cards. But there was a bit of a kind of friction between Rat and Captain, and I didn't think really in my wildest dreams that they'd ever get it together and we'd do any kind of reunion. So when it come along, it was like, oh, at last, okay, fine, because me and Rat, we over the years we continued to play it off and on in different kind of things, or just getting together, the two of us. We had a band, the two of us, called the Stink Insects. So if there was nothing else going on or no other players that we fancied having with us, we just the pair of us,
Yeah.
And that goes back to like maybe mid-80s.
So when this idea came to be about getting everybody back together for the first time after all these years, when the four of you are in the same room for the first time, and considering all the tension that's happened, it's particularly between Rat and Captain, what was it like to be in that room? Was it just like bygones?
it was edgy. There was a certain edginess, but it was a cool edginess. I mean, nobody threw any punches, which was good, and everybody made a real effort. Well, I didn't have to make much of an effort because, I mean, anything that happened between me and the Damned was so long ago. I don't think anybody remembers what happened properly.
Yeah.
It's nice. It was quite, that friction kind of shows a little bit when you see the first publicity shots that were taken on that day that we all met up. It was a nice feeling at the end of doing like the photo session and all that sort of stuff, that everybody was getting on again, and it was like that from then onwards. That was a cool thing. It wasn't like sort of, oh, I still feel rah, rah, rah. It was like, yeah, and by the time we finished the gigs, I mean, there was so much love in the rooms, like when we were doing that, not just between the bands, but the band members, but the audience too. We see like faces showing up in the front rows, that were there for every single fucking night. It was cool, very cool.
Well, I mean, I know as a fan, the idea that was going to happen was like, I don't think people expected it. I don't think they ever expected something like that happen.
That's it.
It was
That's
extraordinary.
What makes it all the more fun, I think, really.
When the touring ended, and obviously, much of that was interrupted by COVID, but once it was over and done, the Damned still continues to tour to this day. Was there ever any ever conversation about you continuing with them, or was that not really in your DNA for that point?
There was a kind of, I mean, everybody knows that I do my own thing, and being a songwriter, it's kind of easy for me than maybe for Rat or whatever, because they don't write songs very often. But, when I did those shows, I was halfway through. It got put on hold for the COVID thing going on. A new album, which is going to finally come out next April. I've never taken so long on an album. It's ridiculous. And so I got a call from the Damned's manager saying that they were putting together a tour. And I said, my first question was, well, if you're putting together a tour with me involved, surely it makes sense to release the live stuff from the tour first, so people kind of know what to expect, a potentially new audience, because that's what you want. You want to play to the old people that have been around forever, from back in the day and stuff, but you want to turn other people on, and hopefully that is what would happen, I mean, there was a lot of, it was by no means like an old, fat, bald-headed, old Damned fans reunion party, those gigs. There was people of all ages, there really was. And they were grooving in it, So I said to the manager, look, maybe once the album's out and people have got used to the idea of new kids and this, that and the other, then maybe I'd think about it, for that time, it was a pointless kind of exercise, I thought.
You talked about your affinity for drummers and the story behind you meeting Rat and the whole thing with the London SS. I mean, obviously there was something about him and the way you played with him that was
Definitely, yeah.
That was pretty powerful.
No, it was Rat was a drummer, still is, that is kind of like it's barely contained wildness, you know. And I mean that barely contained. It's I was used to playing with more like steady drummers, and the people that were coming down for the London SS auditions were all kinds of people who worked on ships and all kinds of people. And some of them could barely play. They didn't know. They'd never heard of the Stooges or the MC5 or other people like that, or the Dolls or whatever. They had no idea about all that. Then Rat turned up, and he just sat on the kit and demolished it. And it was like, wow, this is fucking cool. This is very, very cool. Then I was used to playing kind of in a more kind of a, not restrained way, because I've never been that sort of player, but a little bit more contained. But he brought out that kind of Who side. I mean, I loved the Who, the original Who, way back. You know, I used to see him when I was a kid. And that energy is just something else, you know, and that the Sons of the Who were probably the MC5, so that kind of follows through. And there's this guy, his name was Chris, just walked in with a dirty old overcoat and sat there and smashed the hell out of this kit, you know. And Mick and Tony, who were the other two, Mick Jones and Tony James, I think they thought he was too wild, to be absolutely honest with you. But for me, it was like, I just took off with Rat. You know, he's just, we kind of like, he don't play regular, like sort of fours and stuff like that. He can do, but he chooses not to. But he also, he's got a bit of a jazz thing. And if you listen to our interplay, like I say, it was very hooey, Townsend and Moon and all that sort of stuff. But it also had elements of sort of that Hendrix kind of thing as well, you know. And that they had elements, and Keith Moon, from jazzers, you know. You listen to, I don't know if you're a jazz fan in the slightest, you listen to people like John Coltrane playing off Elvin Jones, and it's something else. And you can hear that all the way through for the Who and the Hendrix and Mitch Mitchell and all that kind of stuff. And that's what I found our interplay was like. We were just energizing each other, you know, just taking it further and further. With the other two, they kind of paled in the background, you know.
You know, it's amazing to me. So I interviewed Rat a couple years ago. He was a part of this project called Professor and the Madman.
I remember that.
With Paul Gray and a couple of American guys, and it was really good. And when I was listening to the record, I was hearing him, and I was listening to Paul play, and I'm like, Jesus! At his age, to be playing so athletically, I was like, it was stunning to me. It's like I couldn't believe he sounded still so great and still such a powerful drummer. And like you say, he's not the kind of guy that's just going to play something simple. He was playing his brains out on that record, and it's great to see someone who's still got that energy, you know, very much like you do. It's like you still have the energy and that drive, just bash the shit out of it.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's one of my favorite. I've got a few favorite drummers, and you know, whenever we play together, that's why when we do the just the two of us, you know, we just inspire each other.
Yeah.
And so anybody else playing would get lost. They wouldn't know where we were going. You know, they'd be thinking, oh, shit, what key is this in? What key's that? Where are we going now? You know, and but we know where we're going because we instinctively feel off each other like that, you know?
The Damned were a band of many firsts, and I know you've talked about that a lot. You know, the first punk single with New Rose, the first UK punk album, also the first band from the UK to play in the States. You know, all things considered, though, you know, when you listen to like all the other music that was released just after The Damned, unlike a lot of that stuff, The Damned still holds up. That first record still holds up today. And it's really incredible if someone has not heard New Rose or Neat 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 or whatever, and they hear it for the very first time. They don't think
Yeah.
it's from 1976. It could be from any time over the last 47 years or whatever it's been. What do you attribute that to? I mean, is it a matter of the production? Was it a matter of the songs being aggressive, or really kind of a combination of all of it?
Well, I think the band played like great, right? And it was like right at the very beginning, obviously, of the Damned, and we were kind of like excited about what was going on. And Nick Lowe, he'd been to some of our gigs and stuff like that. He'd had a T-shirt ripped off his back by a rat, and he was kind of like part of the family. And he just had the expertise and a very good engineer called Bazza in this tiny studio. It was an 8-track studio, and they just knew between them how to capture that energy. I think that's really what it's all about. But I mean, I don't like to sort of like minimize the song. I think the song was a good song, and and being played the way it played, and not being sort of like shouting out like slogans or anything like that, which a lot of that was starting up in punk bands. I think it stayed fresh because it hasn't got anything to date it apart from people who know that it was the first punk single.
The first few shows as The Damned, obviously there's a lot going on in London at the time. There's a lot of music happening all at once. What was the reaction to The Damned early on? I mean, unlike a lot of the bands, I mean, you guys all knew how to play your instruments. I mean, you were. That was one thing that The Damned never shied away from, is they really were great musicians all the way around. But back then, early on, how were people responding to The Damned?
Oh, a lot of people, they didn't understand it. I mean, we'd start playing, if we were headlining or supporting somebody else or whatever. We go on stage, and some of those first shows, particularly outside of London, I mean, the amount of people that started off in the room and the amount of people that were still there three numbers later was a big difference, I tell you. But the cool thing was, what you noticed was, back in those days, you play a gig, say somewhere up north somewhere, and that would happen. But the next time you went up anywhere near there, there'd be a few people that had obviously seen us and starting to wear their homemade kind of punk gear and all this sort of stuff, right? And they'd be there, and there might be a bunch of like army people or whatever who just basically wanted to beat the hell out of us. That's what they come down for. And you had the Teddy Boys, the sons of the original Teddy Boys would come down thinking that they were being kind of upstaged as the new young rebels, right? Because their dads and that had been rebels back in the old 50s days. And so you had these people from different directions just wanted to beat the hell out of you, And we see this going on, but they couldn't get on the stage, so they were picking on these lone punks in the audience. So by the end of the entire thing, you'd have these people standing there just baying for blood, and these punk guys, we brought them all backstage and said, okay, you're safe here, because we got security people. Well, in some places we were safe. It's another story.
So, but the time that you got to the United States and you were playing at CBGB's, and I mean, I know there was only like 4 cities that you guys had wound up playing in during that initial U.S. tour. Was the reaction any different here in the States as it was during those early times with the Damned?
Not on the East Coast. Well, no, I'll go back on that. Not in New York, because New York had sort of like seen it all kind of type thing. And, they'd had they had the Velvet Undergrounds,
right.
Then they had the Dolls, and they had this, that, and the other. And there was, and of course the Ramones had been out at least a year or, I don't know, maybe 18 months by the time we went over there. And we looked at that. We looked at the Ramones album, you know, like we looked at the Dolls. We looked at of course the Velvet Underground and all that kind of stuff. So it was kind of like a home from home, New York. And of course then we played CBGBs for like 3 or 4 nights, and the band playing with us was the Dead Boys. You know, we couldn't have been more suited together, you know. And that's when I first met Steve, you know, who I later went on to work with. But then we did Boston, and that was kind of weird. It was just like a sort of like a student place, you know. We played this Rat Killer place, and there were people sitting down there eating pizza when we were playing. It was like, what the fuck? Get out of here, you know, what's going on here? And then we went over San Francisco. There was a little scene, a little punk scene. We had a kind of a gothy type punk band playing with us, and they were good. They were fun, you know. And but then we went to Los Angeles, and there was 2 people there who put us up in their flat, and they had a band called the Screamers, and I think it was a drummer and a keyboard player or a synth player or whatever. And they, you know, they were good, but it wasn't rock and roll. But later, after we played, first of all, we was going to do the Whiskey, supporting television. And television didn't want us on. So we couldn't do that. And so we played somewhere else. We played the Starwood or something like that. And people come down out of curiosity, obviously. They heard about this punk thing going on. We were the first band over, so we got people coming down. Had a lot of kind of old pop stars phoning up, trying to get on the guest list, which we weren't having at all. You pay, right? I don't care who you are, you know. And then it so turned out, man, I only played there once with the Damned, just that one little tour. And then I went on to do other things. But I found out afterwards that there was a certain amount of people in that audience who went off and started forming bands themselves. That was kind of cool, right? You know, I mean, that was kind of like, you feel a bit like a missionary when you hear that, you know.
So you're a guy that early on very much inspired by Iggy Pop. At that point, you knew what you wanted to do, you know, as a guitar player, and now here you are, not just meeting Steve Bators. We'll talk about him in a little bit, but now you're inspiring people the same way Iggy Pop inspired you. And the ironic part is, within a year or a year and a half of you coming to the States, all of a sudden you're touring with Iggy.
That's right.
Tell me how that even started. I know this would have been like 1979 or
That's
so.
That's right. It was. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about how you even discovered. I mean, how he even discovered you.
I've heard various stories about how come I got involved, but somebody must have recommended me. It was either John from the Pistols. It could have been Elvis Costello. It could be. I've heard different stories. I never asked Iggy, but they knew. I mean, everybody knew I loved Iggy. That's for sure. I mean, I've been talking in all the interviews, nothing but the Stooges and the MC5 and all this sort of stuff. And we recorded the Stooges song on the first album, so it was no secret. And I got a call from his tour manager saying that he'd like me to come down and play some guitar if I was free, because he was rehearsing for an American tour. So I went down there. We hit it off fine. He was happy with the way I played. And luckily, he was going back to his old Stooges kind of thing after doing the Bowie stuff,
Sure.
the Idiot and Lust for Life and that. He gradually got more, his rock and roll took back over him, And by the time that he was forming a band for that particular tour, he just released an album called New Values, which to me is probably the last great Iggy album, to be honest with you. And so luckily, I was playing some of the old stuff. I Want to Be a Dog, No Fun, and a bunch of others, and stuff from New Values. So it was a good show, and the rest of the band were great, Very good drummer called Klaus Kruger,
Mm-hmm.
German guy who came from Tangerine Dream, I think, or something like that. One of those bands from Berlin. And Glenn was on bass from the Pistols. And one of the guys from Patti Smith, Ivan Kroll, was on keyboards and second guitar.
How shocked were you to
I
even
was
get
knocked
to
out,
get the
man.
call?
I was like living a dream. God, bloody hell. Yeah. I mean, previously I'd spent years trying to find my own Iggy. You know what I mean? And now I'm with a real one. I'm with the real deal. You know. Oh, I was knocked out. Every night I'm playing with someone I really dug, and every night it was a different show, if you like, because that's the way he works.
It's interesting how you would go on to work with him, and then, not that far after you're done touring with him, you get together with Stiv to form Lords of the New Church.
Yeah.
Stiv and Iggy have been compared to each other for years, through probably most of Stiv's musical life. Always people saying, "Wow, he seems like Iggy, but very different." Having known both of them and working with both of them, how do you compare the two against each other?
Well, the fact is, Iggy was there first. With no Iggy, then Stiv, I don't know what he would have been doing, but he wouldn't have been the same as he was.
Sure.
But the thing is with Stiv, I mean, Iggy kind of, he had his moves down, he had this down, and had that there. And Stiv was like that too, but then he'd lose all kind of, I don't know. It's hard to explain. It's like trying to explain two guitar players who come from the same kind of scene, be it the blues bands or whatever. You had all these 60s blues bands. You had some great guitar players coming out and all that sort of stuff. And you try and explain why that one was so much like that and that one was so much like that. You can't, because they just had their own individual things. I mean, Stiv wouldn't think of, sort of started crooning, say, well, we used to play Quarter to Three, the old Sinatra thing, the old bar thing. And I can't imagine Stiv doing that. But with Iggy, he had that kind of that croon thing inside him,
right.
And he just come out with things which really would surprise you. And Stiv would come out with all kinds of stuff, not like that, but similar, and you didn't know what to expect. But also, essentially, Stiv was a fucking really funny person. He'd have everybody in the touring bands and all that. Particularly if he had a puff on a joint or whatever, he'd just get really, really over the top. We'd be in tears, and it would be like, Stiv, shut up. But two characters. I'm lucky to have been playing with both them guys,
I remember being in college around the time that those three albums with Lords of the New Church came out. And I remember them being such an important part of the college radio scene here in the States back in the 80s. And it was almost undeniable that the importance of this band. I mean, yeah, it was for all intents and purposes a super group, but the records were really, really strong. And I think people responded to that. But once that third record kind of came out, it seemed like things were starting to fizzle or just, kind of fade away. What was it that kind of eventually, put the nails on that band?
It's too complicated to try and explain to you. There were many things. I think essentially we kind of we'd taken it as far as we could, and people started getting bored. Dave, the bass player, he split, and we had another bass player come in, and I got another guitar player in, and I wanted to sort of bounce off another guitar player, which wasn't a wise decision, as it turned out. I don't know. It's a bit, I don't know, it's like it's been said before many times, but when you're all stuck with each other, like in a van or whatever, traveling about, It's a bit like a marriage. That's what I was going to say.
Sure.
And some marriages. I mean, I'm fortunate. I've been married for 42 years, and I'm looking forward to the next 42 years. But it's some people can only sort of put up with each other for so long, and then the initial buzz is kind of like worn out or whatever, and like I'm talking about in the band, and then it's like, then it can't help but like sort of fizzle, and it's like, it's time to knock it on the head. I mean, that is, and as it happened, that's what happened, basically.
You guys have been signed by Miles Copeland and IRS, and I've talked to a lot of people that have had dealings with IRS and were on that label, and even talked to Miles himself, and everyone seems to kind of have their own Miles Copeland story. What was your experience working with IRS?
It was good. I started working once the band, I left. I split up the band, and they decided to get back together again. And I started doing a solo thing. And a friend of mine knew Miles and said, if you're looking for a manager, maybe you should talk to Miles Copeland. And I thought, well, yeah, I mean, I've got nothing to lose. I'll have a chat to anyone, And I spoke to Miles, and he loved my guitar playing and thought Neat and Euros were fantastic songs and all this sort of stuff. And from that moment on, really, I mean, he put me on a wage, which was very, very nice of him. He didn't know what he was going to do. And so he put out a couple of singles, solo singles. Stuart would be playing drums on them and stuff. And he kept saying to me, Brian, you need a singer. And I said, Miles, I've met this guy in New York, down CBGB's when the Dan played there. His name's Steve Bader. And I think he's the guy, but he's in New York. And it's like, all right. And sort of changed the subject, like he didn't really want to know. And then one day, he says to me, Stuart's been filming this Erg festival. And there's been all these different, like, sort of mostly American bands playing. And one guy who played was this guy, Steve Bader, who apparently used to be in a band called the Dead Boys. I'm like, Miles, I've been telling you about this guy, And so that's how the Lord started up. He got, no, he didn't. Steve came over to work with some of the old guys that used to play in Shan 69 on a project called The Wanderers. And when that happened, me and Steve would then get together kind of on the side and start working on the songs. And the Wanderers run its course, really. I mean, it was an okay kind of band, but I didn't think very much of it, to be absolutely honest with you. But they had a good bass player, too. And this guy, Dave Trigano, who I'd never met up until that point. And it all started to work out that the Lord's formed in a really kind of a funny kind of way,
And you kept a pretty close relationship with Steve throughout the remainder of his life, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So in 1991, when the accident happened and he wind up dying, I mean, how much time had you spent with him at that point? I mean, he was in...
Not a lot of time.
Yeah.
He had a girlfriend, a French girl, and he was living over in Paris. And hence... We had a bit of a kind of a, not a falling out, a misunderstanding. And apparently he'd come over a few times and when I weren't around. I don't know what I was doing, gigging or whatever. And we kept missing each other like that until he died. And we never kind of like sat down and had a laugh again at all, which was very strange. And that went on for about a year before he died,
It's a tragedy that a guy who had that much talent and was that charismatic would die in that way. It's really a shame for a lot of people, especially people who had seen him live and said, and seen what he was all about.
Oh, anybody that met him,
Yeah. You've been in a lot of other projects since then. The one that leaps out to me, I just think is so cool, is the Racketeers. This is a band that you were in with Wayne Kramer from the MC5, Duff McKagan from Guns N' Roses, Stuart Copeland, Clem Burke was involved in this. I mean, you want to talk about
That's right.
you want to talk about great drummers. There's two of them right there. I mean,
yeah, I'm a bit of a glutton for it sometimes. You know what I mean?
if
If they're an offer, I'm going to play with them.
hell yeah. Tell me about that band and how that got put together.
Well, what happened was my family, we moved over to France for about 5 years in the late 90s. Well, it was the mid-90s to the end of the 90s. And when I got back, I got in touch with an old friend of mine, a guy called Ian Grant, who's the manager and used to have an agency and stuff like that. We've been mates for a long, long time. And so I rang Ian up and said, I'm looking to get something together, but I've just been in France for 5 years, kind of bit out of touch. I've got certain people. I'd go see Wayne when he come down to Paris on tour, and we kind of like talk about a few things and ideas. And I was thinking about maybe getting Lemmy in and some different people. Larry Wallace, a friend, Bill Pink Fairy's guitar player, and we come in and Ian said, well, why don't you get in touch with, like, say, Wayne first or whatever, and think about writing a song or two, and we'll get a band round that. This is purely just like a recording idea, and then get in touch with that person and that person and that person. And so I got in touch with Wayne, and he said, well, I think you need a bit more structure in it. And I think the two of us should write an album together and then bring in various musicians. A bit like the way I operate now in my solo stuff. I have maybe 4 or 5 drummers on my albums and stuff, you know, different players for different kinds of songs. So we did that. And I come over to Los Angeles and we were messing about and stuff like that. And I got in touch with Duff. I've met him for lunch. And I said, well, look, this is what we're doing. You know, me and Wayne are doing, we're writing this album. And we've got Stuart coming down to play some drums. We've got Clem coming down. Friends, you know, all friends. And we'd like you to play some bass on a few songs. and Duff was, hell no, I ain't going to come down and play on a few songs. I want to come down and play on the whole album, you know. And so that sort of settled that one. And that's how it kind of kicked off, you know. That everybody wanted to hang around and do it all, you know.
That had to be a whole lot of fun to be playing with all those guys.
Definitely.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Without a doubt, you know what I mean? Wayne's like one of my kind of like inspirations, you know, him and Fred Smith, you know, particularly when they kind of like interplaying together, the two guitars. I mean, that was something else, you know. I saw them a few times and it was very, very cool. So to be playing with one of those guys was an education.
I bet it was.
That way.
I bet. So a while back, I had read that you had been working on a book. Is that still something that you're doing?
It kind of got put on the back thing, like a lot of things, when the COVID thing started up. And this, when I was kind of thinking, right, I've got to get back into the writing of the book. I'm up to a certain point. I'm up to the kind of halfway through the Lords at the moment, and it starts off way back, of course. At first, my wife was doing a course at college or university in Brighton, and she said, you know, it's criminal. I've been talking to these kids who are doing stuff, and they're doing like a thing about the 70s punk scene and all this, but they got no sense of, they got no sources of information, like reference things or whatever. They just got a book written by John Savage, who was a big mate of Malcolm McLaren, and that kind of says that all. And it doesn't really sort of paint a fair picture in any way. Well, so I thought, well, sod it. Why don't I just write a thing about the punk thing as a participant? And if we don't do anything else, we can stick it up online so the kids have got a bit more sources of information, you know?
Well, I hope to God you finish that book, because that is a book I've... The moment I read that you were in the process of writing it, I had to go look. You know, did he release it yet? Did I miss that one? And I was like, I definitely want to hear, the full story of your career and of early punk. I mean, I've studied a good deal of it too, and reading as much as I could, and I'm a little too young to have been there at the time. I mean, I'm 58 now, but it's like there's
You're a kid. You're a youngster.
Well, I'm glad you think so. But I mean, that is a book that I think really absolutely needs to be.
I'm going to finish it. I just wanted to finish this album, but that's the stupid thing. The COVID thing happened, and then I get a call saying, "Damned are getting back together and do I want to do that?" So of course I'm like, "Yeah, that'd be fun." And then I get a call saying, "So and so, the guy at do you know the magazine Vive le Rock?"
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, a guy called Eugene. He wanted to have a special reunion of the Lords with Mike Monroe from Hanoi Rocks, who was a big friend of Steve's, and they used to share a place together, and doing the singing. And
that sounds interesting.
So then that happened,
yeah.
right? And then I thought, fuck it, I ain't going to do nothing else but finish my album, because I'm listening to it again and thinking, wow, I did that on that. The things I've been planning on doing, I'd already done. It was really weird. And finally, this week, as fate would have it, I finished it. And so that's coming out in April. But then the book takes over. I'm going to finish that damn book. Yeah.
So tell me about the record. Who's well, first of all, who's the drummer?
There's a few drummers. Yeah. Yeah. But it's I don't know if you know my solo stuff, that's out on Easy Action, a label. I did a whole bunch of them, and you'll find that mostly it's the same bunch of villains involved on all my albums. But some are like straight ahead punk. Some, like Malcolm, is an old friend of mine, and if I want something a bit more jazzy and kind of, I have the same, very much the same relationship with Malcolm like I do with Rat. We got that jazz thing going. His parents turned me on to jazz way back, and he's a special person. And as a jazz, if I want something a little bit of a reggae thing or an off-the-wall thing, I've got this Rasta guy, Steve, who comes in. It's different player. Horses for courses, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the new ones are called Kicks and Diabolic Licks. and it's I'm really proud of it. I think it's fucking great. Yeah, I can't wait to play it to people and see what they think.
I can't wait to hear it, and I also can't wait to read the book. Brian, I really appreciate the time you gave me today. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure. You've asked some intelligent questions, Mike, and that makes a change sometimes, you know.
Well, I think I just got lucky today.
You caught me in a good mood.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Brian.
Okay, man.
Take care now.
Have fun.
Thanks for listening to Baxi's Musical Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to follow the show on social media for updates on future episodes. You can also email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks again to Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee for their support, but most of all, thanks to you for listening to Baxi's Musical Podcast.